Don't forget. Tonight's share is always Leili Nishma, Ravi Mari Dober, Meir Halevi, Imi Morati, Rachel Banav Michael, and the limud should also be as a zechut for all of our chayalim who are back in various stages of milchama. I guess we're back to a little bit hotter than it was the last couple of times we've gotten together, but it's the same war that's been going on for years or centuries or millennia, and will continue until we get somewhere with it. Anyway. This week's parsha is not a double parsha; it's a single parsha, even though it's not a leap year. We will read parshat Vayakhel and Pekudei separately this year, which means this week we get to read Vayakhel, and the next week we'll be reading Pekudei. So, I wanted to focus. Vayakhel basically is in many ways very, very similar to, of course, the parsha of Tazria. Which describe, excuse me, Truma, excuse me. Thank you, David. That basically Truma is this is what you should build, and Vayakhel is this is what they did build. There are some exceptions, but we're going to focus really on one thing, and that is really the beginning of the parsha. It says Vayakhel Moshe. Moshe gathers all the Jewish people together, and we're going to try to figure out why does the Torah have to tell us that Moshe gathered all the people together. Okay, so that's what we're going to focus on. But before we do that, I want to just go through the first few psukim of the parasha very quickly so that we can perhaps see from the context what it is that Moshe is collecting the people for. Vayakhel Moshe literally means, and Moshe gathered together the people from Kahal, congregation, the word Hakel, of course, the mitzvah that we have after every Shemitah year, the mitzvah of Sukkot, where everybody gathers together. So we have this concept of Likahel is to gather people together, to congregate, or create a congregation, or a kihila. Okay, so here it says, not only does Moshe gather all Bnei Yisrael, it says, call Adat Bnei Yisrael. It says, he has all Bnei Yisrael and all the Adat Bnei Yisrael, and call all of them. So we're going to see what the parsha have to say, why this seemingly superfluous language. Just say, Vayakhel Moshe Bnei Yisrael. Vayomer Aleichem. Why does it say Vayakhel in the first place? We're going to that's what we're going to focus on tonight. But anyway, Moshe gives them two things. These are the things that Hashem has that Hashem commanded that you should do. One is, for 6 days you are allowed to work. And the seventh day is holy, sanctified as a Shabbat to Hashem. Whoever does malacha, creative activity on Shabbat, Yumat shall be put to death. Lo tavaru eish, and then the Torah adds you should not burn a fire in any of your inhabitations b'yom Shabbat on the day of Shabbat. Then we are given the commandment of the Mishkan. Vayomer Moshe kol adat bnei Yisrael lemor. Again, we have the same concept here as el kol adat bnei Yisrael. Again, Moshe speaks to kol adat bnei Yisrael. So it seems redundant if we've just said above el kol adat bnei Yisrael. This is what Hashem commands, and this is what He says. Tells me to tell you. You should take an offering, a truma to Hashem. Kol nadiv libo, anyone who is generous of heart, should bring it. A trumat Hashem, and then it lists 11 or 12 different types of materials in the next 5 psukim. And then we're told, in verse 10, we are told all those who are wise of heart among you, Yavo should come v'yasu and should do, at kol asher tzivah Hashem, all that Hashem has commanded. And then the next 9 psukim are all of the parts of the Mishkan, the curtains, the brackets, the plates, everything is spelled out in detail, in summary, the specific pieces, and then the rest of the parsha deals with the details of how they were made. And then it tells us again, call Adat B'nai Yisrael milifnei Moshe. All of Adat B'nai Yisrael leave in front of Moshe, and they go off and do what Moshe is commanded. So the question the Parshanim raise is, what is the concept of Vayakhel? And that's, as I said, what we want to focus on tonight. We're not going to start with Rashi, because Rashi's going to look at the timeline, and I want to focus first on what is the purpose of the gathering. Okay, so Rashbam, Rashi's grandson, says the following: Vayakhel, Moshe gathers together, lakachat mikol echad machatzit hashekel lagul golem. That the purpose of gathering the people together was very simply to collect the half shekel from everyone. Everyone had to donate a half shekel. The gam, but see, that wouldn't be enough, because if it was only to collect the half shekel, we know we only have to collect the males, not the females, not the kids. And kol adat bnei Yisrael seems to imply that everybody is collected. Okay, so Rashbam says very simply that that's one reason, is to collect the half shekel. But the second, the gam las hiram al melechet hamishkan, to tell them about the work for the Mishkan, that is to be, that now they are now supposed to start doing the collection and the work to prepare the Mishkan. So that's why he wants everybody to be gathered. Now, Ibn Ezra has two, by the way, those of you who don't know, Ibn Ezra wrote two different commentaries on the Torah. One is called Haperush HaKatzar, the short Perush. The other is his regular full Perush. And they don't always overlap. They don't always agree. Sometimes they go in two different directions. But here, in terms of Vayakhel, Ibn Ezra goes similarly, but again, not necessarily in the same order. So we're going to start with the long Ibn Ezra, which is on your right side. Vayakhel, Tam Vayakhel. Why did Moshe want to collect everybody together? What was the purpose of gathering everybody together? Why didn't he just, send it out? Or why does it specifically have to tell us that? Sheyishmeu hakol mipiv devar mishkan, that everyone should hear it directly from Moshe's mouth rather than secondhand, the commandment to collect for the Mishkan, sheyitnadvu, so that everybody would come and make donations. If Moshe says we're collecting funds or goods or things for the Mishkan, people, presumably, the Ibn Ezra seems to think, would have been more likely to give than if the regular fundraiser came. Moshe asked, so therefore he wants everybody to hear what the needs are, so everybody will come and give. Uperush, and therefore when it says that Moshe says, Elad Varim Asher Tiva Hashem Lasod Otam, these are things that Hashem wants you to do, is Hamishkan V'chelav La'asod. That's why it says Lasod, to make. That's referring specifically to the Mishkan and all the utensils of the Mishkan, not Shabbos. Alkein Kotuv Lasod Otam. That's why it specifically says to make them. This is what Hashem commands to do, to make. It involves action here. V'nei hatam, and the reason is that Moshe wants everybody to be involved. Hashem tzivani shetasu ma she'omer lochem. That Hashem is the one who commanded me that you, Klal Yisrael collectively, have to make what I am telling you to make. V'hu, he's here at them, and Hashem is the one who is commanding you. Af al pi shemase shamayim atem chayavim lasot. Even though this is heavenly work that you have to do, even though you would think, oh, well, this is God's work. God says we should do it immediately, as quickly as possible, 24/7, keep working. Moshe says, no, that's why we have this insertion of Shabbat. Hashem has told me, even though this is important work, it's holy work, does not supersede the Shabbat. Don't do it on Shabbat. And by the way, and somebody who thinks, oh, the Mishkan's more important, I'll do it on Shabbat, witnesses will come, they'll warn him, and they'll bring him to court and will cause him to be executed, because it's a capital crime to do work on Shabbat, even if it's work to build the Mishkan. In another place, he says, we will understand and learn that the methodology of death is skila, stoning, is how the death sentence is carried out for one who transgresses the Shabbos willfully, with the proper witnesses, with the proper warning, and is brought to court and convicted. Okay, that's again a whole different story. But let's go back now to Ibn. So in Ibn Ezra's first, he says very simply that Moshe is collecting everybody for the purpose of telling them about building the Mishkan. The only reason that Shabbat is inserted here is to tell them that they can't, that Mishkan does not supersede Shabbat. That's why Shabbos is included here, but not to think that the primary purpose of collecting everybody was to teach them about Shabbat. Not the case. Okay, Vayakhel Moshe. And Ibn Ezra in the parish of Kotzar is going to go in a very similar way, but we'll see in a minute. Atad diber Yisrael maseh Mishkan, achar shi'arad im haluchot hashniyot. So immediately after coming down with the second luchot, Now Moshe goes, which is what we read at the end of last week's parsha, that Moshe came down with Lucho. We talked about how Moshe's face was radiant at the end of the parsha. That's what the last few psukim read about. Now, Moshe, now that he's come down and he's has the Luchot Shniyot, Hashem has forgiven Am Yisrael, he tells them now we have to make the Mishkan. The Tam Vayakhel. So why does Moshe have to gather everybody together? Why can't he just send word out to the Mishkan? You got to collect. Because everybody who was involved either actively or passively by not protesting in the work of the Mishkan now has to give a redemption, a fee, kofer nafsham, a redemption for their soul, for they sin, to the work of the Mishkan. When it says Eila Dvarim Asher Tziva Hashem, it's telling us these things al mitzvat Shabbat. Shishikula keneged kol mitzvot. That Shabbos, it says Eila Dvarim. These are the things that you should tell Bnei Yisrael to do, to tell us that Shabbos is equal to all of the other mitzvot. That they should not be involved in any of the categories of malachot. And it seems to me, as he said, even though that's what the Gaon, that's what Rav Satya says, he doesn't want to go to say that that's the purpose. He says, when it says in the pasuk, Eila Dvarim, these things Hashem has commanded me to tell you, very much similar to what he said before. That we should not think that Eila Dvarim, that Hashem is gathering them together to teach them about Shabbat. He's gathering them together because they have to be involved in the work of the Mishkan. Chizkuni goes a little bit further than that. Okay. I'm sorry, he goes in the same vein. It's the Bechor Shor is going to say a little bit more. Vayakhel Moshe kol Adar b'nei Yisrael k'sheyarad min ha'ar. Soon as he comes down from the mountain with the Luchot, he sends word to the camp, everybody's got to gather around. Eila Dvarim shani rotza lomar lachem, these things I want to tell you. He melechet hamishkan v'chelav. This is the work of the Mishkan. The tziva HaKadosh Baruch Hu lasotam, and Hashem has commanded you to me to command you to make the Mishkan, and that's why everybody's got to be here, because everybody's got to be involved. For sure, goes a step further in that and says, why does Moshe have to gather everybody at Kol Adat B'nei Yisrael? Kidei shelo yuchlu lit'ra'em lomar Kadosh Baruch Hu shetziva lasot lo hamishkan. Nobody should have any complaint to say, wait, HaKadosh Baruch Hu told you to make the Mishkan. V'lo hodino shenavi trumat hamishkan. Moshe, why didn't you let us know? Nobody can complain. Moshe gathers everybody together so nobody can complain and say, Moshe, you were involved in building this Mishkan. I wanted to donate. You didn't even tell me. How come? So nobody can complain. Moshe gathers everybody together. Nobody can complain and say, hey, Hashem commanded you to make the Mishkan. You didn't tell us that we have to bring donations. We didn't know. Until Moshe didn't want to tell a few and to have them spread the word. He wants everybody to hear it directly from him, so nobody can complain, oh, I didn't know there was a fundraising campaign going on. I would have donated, right? And nobody can complain, well, I missed my chance to give. And he told everybody at the same time, all together. That's why the Torah emphasizes that he gathers everybody together. Okay, Ramban. Vayakhel Moshe kol adat b'nei Yisrael. Yichlo kol adat b'nei Yisrael. Again, this phrase that we've been talking about, this kol adat, all the entire congregation of the Jewish people. Hanashim v'anashim, men and women. Ki chulam hitnadvu b'mlechet hamishkan, because all of them were involved in donating either resources or talents or both to the work of the Mishkan. V'nei Moshe. Now, behold, Moshe, achar shetziva li Aaron v'hanesiim v'chol b'nei Yisrael ha'anashim kol asher diber ito b'har Sinai achrei shfor haluchot. After Moshe came down with the luchot and he shared with the men, first with Aaron and then the leaders and then everybody, all that Hashem had told him at Har Sinai, and then he covers himself, as we read at the end of last parsha, so that people shouldn't be afraid of him. So as soon as he had finished, basically, as soon as he got down, he again told them to gather everybody, male and female. And it appears that this was not the day he came down, this was the next morning. In other words, he didn't do it the same day he came down, but the next morning he immediately gathered everybody. The Amar L'chulam Inyan HaMishkan, and he told everybody, men and women alike, about the Mishkan, Asher Nitztava Bo Mitchila Kodem Shvar Luchot. Very important. Ramban, his whole theory is that the commandment, parshat of Truma and Tetzaveh, the commandments for the Mishkan and for the Kohanim and all of that, all came before Chet HaEgel, which, by the way, is not everybody's opinion. There's a whole machloket, there's machloket among Rishonim. When did Hashem command the Mishkan? Is it after Chet HaEgel or before Chet HaEgel? Ramban, very, very strongly, right here in the part yellow, Ramban's theory throughout is that the Mishkan is not an after-the-fact atonement for the Chet HaEgel. It is part and parcel of what was supposed to happen before the Chet HaEgel. They were supposed to have the Mishkan built. Once HaKadosh Baruch Hu had forgiven them, and gave Moshe the second set of Luchot, and renewed or created a new Brit that Hashem, yes, would go with Bnei Yisrael to Eretz Yisrael. They return to their state of the relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu returns to the way it was before the Chet HaEgel. And it would be, and the proof of that would be that Hashem would rest His presence amongst them, just like Hashem commanded Moshe before the Chet HaEgel, as we read at the beginning of parshat Truma, that they should make a Mishkan so Hashem can dwell in their midst. So now, even though a long time has passed since Hashem commanded Moshe about the Mishkan, Moshe immediately wants to share it now with Bnei Yisrael. Now that the Chet HaEgel is past, we're beyond that. Hashem has forgiven us. We've renewed our relationship with Hashem back to what it was before. Now we can go back and build the Mishkan. That's why immediately after we finish reading about the second Luchot, immediately the next day, Moshe immediately begins with the Melechet HaMishkan. Okay, now we got to Rashi. And Rashi again says the following: Vayakhel Moshe. When does Moshe collect everybody? L'mocharat Yom HaKippurim. Again, the day after Yom Kippurim, day after he comes down with Luchot Shniyot, not the same day, but the next day. Kesheyarad min hahar, after he comes down from the mountain. The hula shown hif'il, but however, Vayakhel is not that Moshe physically went out and schlepped everybody and told, come on. Ella, sheina osif anashim biyadayim. This does not mean that Moshe went and physically schlepped everybody in. Elohim nis nesafim al pi diburo. That Moshe gave command that Am Yisrael should be gathered together, that everybody should be there. They were nesafim al pi diburo. They gathered together through Moshe's command. V'targamo v'achnash instead of anash. It's not v'chanash. It's not that he collect, like, for example, if I would collect stuff and put it together, that's a different word in Aramaic. Here it's he caused them to collect together, to come together. Now, Kleakar is going to pick up on this Rashi. Rashi explains the Macharat Yom HaKippurim, that this happens on the day after Yom Kippur. The year is still 2448. They left Egypt. They got to Har Sinai. They had the Chet HaEgel. And then Moshe goes up and prays that Hashem should forgive them. He gets the second Luchot on Yom Kippur. Only 6 months have passed since they left Egypt. However, Kleakar notes another place where Rashi has this same exact phraseology. Parshat Yitro Ketib. Parshat Yitro, Vayimi Macharat, Vayeshem Moshe Lishpot Ha'am. We have a story in Yitro where after Yitro comes to Moshe, that Moshe is sitting and judging the people from all day. And it says, and the Torah introduces that chapter by Yitmi Macharat. It was in the day after. Now we all think, okay, the day after Yitro, okay, Moshe sat and judged. But that's not what Rashi says there. Rashi there says, who perish Rashi, Sham Rashi's perish there in Parshat Yitro, Kizeh Yal Macharat Yom HaKippurim. This also happened on the day after Yom Kippur. And there it says, Vayeshem Moshe al Lishpot Ha'amor Ha'amam Moshe min haboker ad ha'arev. That the people were standing in line waiting to for Moshe all day long. So the question he wants to know, if that's the case, how could both have happened the same day? If Moshe was busy judging people all day long, how do you have time to gather everybody together and tell them about the Mishkan? V'nira lefari. So it must be, we explain, sheyadua shehakel zeh, that this collection, hayalo dialeha mitzvah hamishkan, was the purpose is, as we've said all along, the purpose here is to tell everybody about the Mishkan, that we have a commandment, Hashem wants us to build the Mishkan. And everybody's got to donate for it. As the next psukim are going to explain. Now Moshe was concerned. Now what happens if somebody has something in his possession that he thinks is his but really doesn't belong to him? And he's going to take that and donate it and use it for the Mishkan. And the person who's owning this thing, has this thing in his possession, thinks, I am the true owner because I own it. It's mine. But it really doesn't belong to him. And if it really doesn't belong to him and it's something that he's appropriated or misappropriated, then it should not be used for the holy work of building the Beit HaMikdash. And if we sit down and have some cases to judge, then we'll find who is in the wrong, who's in the right. Al Kain, therefore, here is Moshe Techila. Moshe first, before he announced anything that they were collecting contributions, he wanted first announced Nibal Dvarim Yigashe Laila Mishpat. Whoever has a case of disputed ownership, they think somebody has something that they own, come now, now's your chance to come and have your case heard. So that everybody will properly reach a place of peace, of being safe, and knowing that what they have in their possessions is really theirs. And Moshe would teach everyone, make sure everybody knew what was theirs and knew what wasn't theirs, even more importantly, knew what wasn't theirs, because they would have reached either a compromise or a judgment would have happened, would have taken place, so that everybody knew that what they had was really theirs. And after that, after Moshe resolved all questions of disputed ownership, then he could tell people, go and contribute from something that's yours to Hashem, not from something that you may not really own. When it says, take from yourselves an offering to Hashem, it means something that clearly belongs to you, not that belongs to your next door neighbor. Because if not, why does it say It should just say Hashem to take Truma. Why meidchem from you? Obviously, where else am I going to take it from? I'm not going to take somebody else's stuff. But the word meidchem there is to remind us that everybody had adjudicated all of their potential cases before. The alpha P. But however, wait a minute. Wait a minute. There's one guy, Moshe. There's 600,000 litigants potentially coming with cases. That doesn't even count the women. How many women had litigation that they? So all of these guys, how's he going to hear them all in one day? Which is exactly what Yitro says, right? How can all the people? How they're going to wear you out? You can't sit here all day judging. The alpha pig. There's no doubt. Yakar says. Impossible to hear every single case of disputed ownership in one day. And even if certainly he wasn't spending the whole day sitting in judgment. Why? Even though it says there that he sat from morning till evening, but nonetheless, Rashi there explains from the Gemara. The purpose of saying that he judged from Boker till Erev, from morning till night, was to say that any judge who judges fairly, who looks and tries to judge a case fairly, especially monetary case, is considered a partner with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in creation, because you have helped create peace in the world. And that is a critical component. And where do we learn that out? Because the pasuk says, "Min haboker ad ha'arev," and we compare that to the creation where it says "Vayerev vayivoker" after each day. The imlo came because if Moshe was really sitting and judging them all day, And Matai Hodia Maseh Mishkan. If he was busy judging them all day, when did he have a chance to tell them about the Mishkan? It says Vayakhel, he told them that day about building the Mishkan. If he was busy sitting as a judge all day, the whole day from morning till night, when did he have time? So obviously he wasn't sitting in judgment all day, but the reason the pasuk says from all day he's sitting in judgment is to teach us this important lesson about judging properly. So therefore, Mikol Makkah, certainly everybody didn't bring all the donations, weren't all brought the same day. However, perhaps what the Torah is alluding to what Rashi is alluding to by putting both of these events at the day after Yom Kippur, Hayamodiyam, to tell us that Moshe is part of the announcement for the Mishkan that we're collecting contributions. Hayamodiyah shekol davar sheshnaim chalukim alav shelo yitnum nedava ad kitbar tchila din immi. If you have something that there's a dispute about whether you own it or not, don't bring it as a donation. The only things I want as donations are things you are absolutely certain are your possession. Anything that isn't, you're not sure about, then don't bring it as a donation. Till we have a chance to adjudicate your case. Then if you want to give it as a donation after you've won your case, you can do that. But that's what Moshe announced. When he announced that we're collecting contributions, he says the contributions have to be made from something that there's no question that it really belongs to you. The Altar HaRemez, and perhaps this whole thing is to hint, the real purpose of congregating, of collecting everybody together, was to do one thing, was to reestablish peace. What does that mean? A person can't live in the same enclosure with a snake. And after Moshe is now going to teach them about the Mishkan, everybody is a shutaf everybody is a partner in the building of the Mishkan. It's like everybody now, quote, lives in the same area. You're all in the same building. You're all part of the same collective approach. And if you're all not at peace with each other, it's not going to work out. The first thing Moshe wants to do is gather everybody together in unity, that they should all be united in this endeavor, because if they're not, it's not going to work. The Alkain, therefore, Perish Rashi explains that when did Moshe command them about the Mishkan? It had to be the day after Yom Kippur. Why? We know that normally when Bnei Yisrael arrives somewhere, there's always complaining. There's always something going on. There's one case where it isn't. The only place that they arrive where everybody is at peace with everybody else is when they get to Matan Torah, as we read at the beginning of Yitro. Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged. They camped singular. Vayichan Sham there. It's the only time that we have the word Vayichan, not Vayachanu. They camped here. It's Vayichan. They camped in the singular. Why? Because everybody was united because they knew they were going to receive the Torah. The Imkang, if the case is that we all have to be united in order to start the work of the Mishkan, how could we collect everybody together if they're busy arguing and quarreling? And they're not all focused on the same goal. This is not the proper time. In other words, if they're busy quarreling, not the right time to start building the Mishkan. The only day he could figure out that we would get everybody together was the day after Yom Kippur, when they're still in this Yom Kippur frame. Yom Kippur, Hashalom mitavech beinehem. Yom Kippur is the day when everybody is at peace with each other. And for that day, kulam b'gudachat, everybody is joined together. Why? Because we're all in the same boat on Yom Kippur. We're all davening to Hashem for the same thing. That Hashem should hear our tefillot, should accept our teshuvah. We're all davening for the same thing. Everybody's in the same boat on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, Hashalom mitavech beinehem, ube'etzem hayom hahu kulam b'gudachat. On Yom Kippur, everybody is united. Therefore, it was still the Yom Kippur spirit was still there. Moshe was able to gather them all together on the day after Yom Kippur, united to begin this process. But he could only do it as long as yesterday's spirit of peace was still alive. Aval im yomo yomayim yamod. He'd wait a day or two. Azlo yukama shalom. Then we're sure that we never again reestablish that level of peace. Because the package was already undone. And everybody is off going their own direction. In order that they shouldn't be, the project shouldn't be upended because of lack of peace, because there's all kinds of quarrels about who owns what and who owes what to whom. Ki ein shalom shel Yom Kippur Eisek Bazeh. Because Yom Kippur doesn't get involved in the differences between Pesach. So if we wait too long after Yom Kippur, when everybody is focused on their getting back together, we're going to lose that spirit. Al Kain, therefore, Yashav Moshe Gamlish Pot Etzem Hayom Ahu. Today, Shemikol Tzad Yeh Shalom B'neihem. Moshe not only sat and judged, so that, again, because if you judge properly, you help create peace. Then they would all be able to join in this shared dwelling, in building this Mishkan that was a joint project of everybody. After now, everybody is joined together, and now we're all as one. Through the Mishkan, which joins everybody together. Now that the Mishkan exists, we will find other cases. The Kli Yakar says, we look through the rest of the Torah, we'll find other cases where Moshe gathers everybody together. And it's not Yom the day after Yom Kippur. So how can Moshe gather them all together? How can they all be in peace? The answer is because that once the Mishkan has been built and everybody has accepted that, then it's a lot easier to recreate that spirit of harmony. Kol shkein, the Mashkasav, the Akeda, Derech, the Litza, Al Pasuk, Lotzvaru, Eish. That what is the purpose? Why is the Torah here? It's the Balakeda writes that there's a hint here in the parsha. Why does it specifically talk about Lotvaru Eish on Shabbat? You shouldn't light a fire on Shabbat. Why is that the one malacha that is listed of all the malachot of Shabbat? He says that the purpose of that is really a hint to Shelo Yatzitu Eish HaMachloket B'Yom Shabbat. That on Shabbos, when people are home and they're not working, don't light the fire of quarreling. Don't make Shabbos into a day of quarrels and arguments and problems. Why? Well, because it's a day where everybody's at home and they interact. If we aren't focused on what the purpose of Shabbat is, and we start talking about things that are not important, we will end up getting into quarrels and differences of opinion. Therefore, it's proper that it begins with Vayakhel, that Moshe collects them and get together. That Moshe's purpose is collecting them all together as one group. So that they shouldn't light a fire of difference of opinion. That everybody, Moshe gathered everybody together in unity. That's the key. Kli Yakar says, in order to build a Mishkan, in order to successfully build a Mishkan, everybody had to be united. So the only day he could do that was right after Yom Kippur, when they were still permeated with the spirit of Achdut of Yom Kippur. Okay. Torah Moshe. Torah Moshe wants to talk. Moshe Sofer wants to explain what is it about Shabbos and the Mishkan. Why do we have Shabbos first, Mishkan second? Where some places it's Mishkan first, Shabbos second. Some cases Shabbos first, Mishkan second. What's the protocol here? Okay, so he says here, Moshe hiktim Shabbat l'malachat Mishkan. Moshe begins by telling them about Shabbat and then talks about the Mishkan. If we look at last week's parsha, it's exactly the opposite. We have Truma, we have Tetzaveh to talk about the Mishkan, we have Kitisa, the beginning, which talks about the last few things of the Mishkan, and then it talks about Shabbos. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu goes in the exact opposite order. He talks about Mishkan and then Shabbos. Moshe says Shabbos first and then Mishkan. So why is that? Yesh Lomar, to the Zohar, Ita. He says that I found in the Zohar, to Kodem Egel, before the Egel, before the Chera Egel, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Parshat Truma Me'ei Kol Ish Asher Yidbenu Libav. When Moshe is given the command for the Mishkan. He is told that he is allowed to take a nedava from any person who wants to make a donation. Afilu me'erev rav, even from the Erev Rav, who are this group of converts who joined the Jewish people. Aval achshav, but now when Moshe begins to give the command by parshat Vayakhel acharei ha'egel, after the chet ha'egel, tivku me'itchem truma. Moshe tells them, only take from yourselves the truma. Below me'itchem below me'erev Rav. Not from the Erev Rav. Why? Al-dat, comparable to what we read in the book of Ezra, when the Bnei Yisrael were building the second Beit HaMikdash, the Goyim wanted to contribute, and Ezra said, no way. That it's only for us. This house of God we are in charge of building it. You can come once it's built, but you're not allowed to participate in the expenses. You're not allowed to give money toward the Beit HaMikdash. Only we are allowed to build it. Once it's built, fine. Hinei. So therefore, we have no way of knowing which comes first, Shabbos or Melachat HaMishkan. Why? Because they're both holy endeavors. They're both, the frequency is the same. So you can do whichever one you want first. However, because Shabbos applies to everybody, Ben Yisrael Ubein LaErev Rav. Shabbos applies to everybody, not only the Jewish people, but also the Rav. If they've converted and they're Jewish, they've got to also keep the Shabbat. Mishkan, but when it comes to the Mishkan, Yisrael, the Mishkan, the contributions to the Mishkan are only to be done by Bnei Yisrael. Al-Kain, Shabbos Kodem, therefore Shabbos comes first when Moshe lists them, rather than the Mishkan being first and then Shabbat, because the Shabbos applies to everyone, and then presumably he told the Erev Rav to go away, and then he told them about the Mishkan. Okay, Nachalat Yaakov says the following. Vayakhel Moshe. Ayin al-Shich Shehiksha. Al-Shich asked the following question. Again, Mishkan lo tidche Shabbat k'mo b'korbanot. If once the Mishkan is built, once the Beit HaMikdash is built, there are certain korbanot that we have to bring on Shabbat, even though we do Malach on Shabbat. So why is it that the korbanot, why do they override the Shabbat, but building the Mishkan, which is a prerequisite to be able to bring the korbanot, doesn't override the Shabbat? Okay. Second question Achlat Yaakov asks is the word te'aseh. Sheishit yamim te'aseh malacha. Te'aseh is passive. Work shall be done, rather than ta'aseh, you should do work. 6 days, work shall be done. Why te'aseh? Why is it passive? Remember ta'aseh malacha. Should say 6 days, you're allowed to do work. You can work. So he says, it appears to me, these two questions, in other words, why the Malach and Mishkan doesn't override Shabbat, and why it says Te'aseh, I think are connected, he says. And if I give this, each one will help answer the other. The HaKarbanot, once we've built the Mishkan, bringing the Karbanot, Hey Maaseh B'nei Adam. This is human activity. Bringing Karbanot, even though it's sanctified activity, it's because God has told us, but it's something we have to do. We have to go there, bring the karban, slaughter it, sprinkle the blood, the Kohanim have to do, and all the other things, all have to be done by human beings. And the fact that people are willing to do this avodah because Hashem has commanded them is so important to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it pushes aside the Shabbat when it's done properly. However, Melechet HaMishkan, the work of building the Mishkan, Shumasei Hashem. The work of building the Mishkan, even though we think it was natural, it wasn't. The work of building the Mishkan was all miraculous. Shakol Nase B'Masei Hashem Me'elav. Even though there were artisans doing work, all the work really got done by Hashem. Hashem was the one who did all the work. Kimo, as we saw in the case of the menorah. Shehishlich Ba'esh Nase Menorah. Because by the menorah it says Te'aseh, shall be made. How was the menorah made? Medrash says, what happened? Moshe took this kikar of gold, threw it into the smelting pot, boom, and out comes the menorah. Wonderful. Did Moshe have anything to do with it? Betzalel have anything to do with it? Yeah, they collected the gold and threw it into the fire. But the ikar avodah, the ikar work, the malacha, the creative part of creating the menorah came from Hashem. So who is providing the work here of building the Mishkan? Hashem. The Chola Mishkan v'Hakamato, and the entire Mishkan and building it, Nasa Kol Me'elav, all was done by itself, Maseh Hashem. Because if you think about it, what is the Mishkan made of? It's made of 10 Amma beams, 5-meter poles, solid wood poles. You know how heavy a solid wood pole of 5 meter is? You don't think, to get that to stand up, no single person can do that, okay? I don't know anybody, I don't care how good a lumberjack you are, you can't pick up a 5-meter piece of wood, that's solid wood through and through. It's just not something you're done. Okay, I mean, if I remember correctly, many years ago, was learning the whole thing about the Mishkan with my son, and each of these beams is something like 100 tons. Okay, I don't remember what maybe it was 100, maybe it was 10 tons or whatever. It's a rather significant chunk of wood. It's heavy. It's not just pick it up like a little 2x4. Not quite. Okay, so in other words, the Mishkan and its construction is all done me'elav maseh Hashem. It's physically impossible for a person to be able to do some of these things. They're only achieved because Hashem is miraculous. You have to make believe you're doing it, so it looks like a human being is doing it. Really, Hashem is one who's doing it. So we talked about the karbanot being something that's human involved. Therefore, Hashem loves it and wants it to be dof Shabbat. But when it comes to building Mishkan, that Hashem is the one doing it. Hashem decided that he was not going to do any creative activity on Shabbat. You see that in the Parashit, right? And that's why the malacha of the Mishkan is not Docha Shabbos, does not set aside Shabbat, only the Karbanot. That's why it's Te'aseh, it's Ke'aseh Me'elav. All of this work of building the Mishkan is going to happen by itself. Therefore, since Hashem wants to rest, you have to rest. Whoever does work on Shabbat will die. If you think you're the one building the Mishkan, you're not. And if you try to do it on Shabbat, you're going to be chayav mita. And the entire work of the Mishkan is only sanctified because Hashem's the one who's doing it. Therefore, also Shabbat, who does on Shabbat, lo maaseh Hashem hema umachala hamikdash Hashem. So he is profaning the mikdash because he's thinking I'm the one who's doing the work, whereas in reality it's Hashem doing it, and therefore it's not Docha Shabbat. Okay. Umashina. Why does it say Vayakhel Moshe that Moshe has to gather everyone together? Yeroy lefi hayadua is I'm explaining is a well-known shakdusha hishorish hoachdut. Holiness is the root of unity of the Jewish people. Hatuma hishorish hapirut. And when we are not seeking kedusha, when we are looking for impure things, that is what causes Am Yisrael to get split apart. And we just read last week's parshat Egel. All the Egel was made. The biru koach hatuma shua pirud, and through the Egel, the power of Tuma was strengthened, which led to Bnei Yisrael to be dispersed, to be separate. But when they wanted to come to make the Mishkan Shorish HaKedusha as a source of Kedusha, we need Am Yisrael to be sanctified, to do holy work. How do we reach holiness? By Jewish unity. Very, very important lesson here in this whole parsha, that if we really want to achieve holiness, we really want to achieve our goal as the Jewish people, we have to be united in that goal of achieving holiness. It is through the work and the davening and the words that are shared of Torah in shuls, in Beit Knesset, and through Beit Mikdash, that is what removes the Ruach HaTumah and Yisam Bikdusha, allows Am Yisrael to become Kadosh, in order to be able to build such a structure. Therefore, Moshe wants to gather everybody together in unity. That's the key to the lesson of the Mishkan. Emet Yaakov is basically going to say the same thing, and since my time is just about out, we'll just call it. We'll just wrap it up here. Basically, as I said, Moshe gathers everybody together because in order to achieve the goal of Am Yisrael, we have to be united. And that is true, no less true today than it was 3,300 years ago. And if we cannot understand and learn that lesson, we are going to be once again doomed to failure. So it behooves us to focus on reaching Achdut, of loving everybody, of Am Yisrael should be working together to achieve the goal of Kedusha, of moving forward as the Jewish people, so that we can be an Orlai Goyim and we can be Zocha to Gula Shleimim. Thank you all. I open it up at this point for questions, comments, feedback. Anybody? Okay, if not, have a good rest of the week. Have a Shabbat Shalom, and Hashem, we'll see you all next week, same time, same place, and take good care. Laila Tov, everyone.
Laila Tov. Thank you.